Bienvenidos, bienvenidos. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Estuardo Rodriguez. I am with the Raven Group out of Washington, D.C. We are very excited to partner with Casa México and the Mexican consulate here in Austin, Texas. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Great. So you were just telling me I need to be louder? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. We want to dive right into this. Obviously, there are so many great discussions happening during South by Southwest, but we wanted to thank you all for joining us here today for this important conversation, as there's a lot of energy out there, a lot of interest as to what happened in the midterm elections that brought the first two Latinas to Congress, Veronica Escobar and Sylvia Garcia, and what that energy meant, what that energy means for the 2020 elections, which clearly have already been on full speed ahead. So with that, we are honored today to have a veteran reporter, a five-generation Texan, or Tejano. We'll call you Tejano for this discussion. Five-generation Tejano who's seen it all, covers the governor here and state politics, and has been a wonderful and influential figure in the Dallas Morning News. Mr. Bob Garrett will lead us through this conversation today. Thank you all for your time. Bob?
Thank you, Estuardo. Welcome. It's good to be here. In alphabetical order, not necessarily in order of importance, I'm going to give you a quick rundown on our panelists. Matt Barreto, PhD, professor of poli-sci and Chicano-Chicana studies at UCLA, is co-founder of Latino Decisions, and that's a research and polling firm. Time magazine called it the gold standard in Latino American polling. In 2012, HuffPost said Matt was, quote, the pollster that had his finger on the pulse of the Latino electorate, unquote. In 25, he's hired by Hillary Clinton presidential campaign to direct focus groups in polling research on Latino voters. And for the 2018 cycle, Latino Decisions played a major role in advising the D-TRIP, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, on engagement of Latino voters. Something tells me we're going to hear him brag a little bit about the results. Matt is an expert on tracking polls, regular polls, focus groups, and messaging. He got his PhD in political science in 2005 from University of California, Irvine. Go Anteaters. He was on the faculty of the University of Washington for 10 years and then moved down to Los Angeles and UCLA in 2015. He's written 4 books, more than 60 articles, and won many grants and awards. Our next panelist, Daniel Garza, president of the Libre Initiative, was born in the Central Valley of California, and until the age of 19, he was and his family migrated annually from their ancestral homeland in Garza Gonzales in Nuevo Leon, Mexico. They would go throughout California, even do the beats in Nebraska, the Nebraska Panhandle, and Washington State. The Garza family were farm workers. He was a staffer to U.S. Representative Doc Hastings, a 20-year Republican congressman from Central Washington State. Daniel won an election himself to City Council in Toppenish, I hope I pronounced that right, Washington, in 1996. In 2001, he joined the George W. Bush administration. He worked for the Secretary of Interior in External and Intergovernmental Affairs. He moved over to the White House, Office of Public Liaison, in 2004. In 2006, Daniel became president of Televisa's Hispanic Poder Group. He then joined Univision to produce and host a weekly Spanish-language news talk show, Agenda Washington. Currently resides in Mission, Texas, and he heads Libre, which on its website touts itself as a nonpartisan, nonprofit, grassroots organization that advances the principles and values of economic freedom to empower the U.S. Hispanic community. He was just explaining to me that they get some funding from this umbrella group that the Koch brothers have helped, among other billionaires, fund called Freedom Partners. There you go. And our final panelist, Tom Perez, as you know, is chairman of the Democratic National Committee, former U.S. Labor Secretary in the Obama administration, and has himself been elected to local office. I was telling Daniel, guys who put their name on a ballot, I have special respect for. In 2002, Tom became the first Latino official elected to the Montgomery County Council in suburban Maryland, suburban Washington, D.C., Maryland suburbs. He grew up in Buffalo, New York, son of immigrants from the Dominican Republic. And he boasts of Buffalo as a union town that taught him hard work, integrity, service, and perseverance. He put himself through college with Pell Grants, worked on the back of a garbage truck. After he got out of law school, instead of going to work for a white shoe law firm, he chose to work for the Civil Rights Division, I believe, at the Justice Department. And he worked his way up, spent all 8 years in the Obama administration. First, he was head of Justice's Civil Rights Division, where he led the charge against police misconduct, voter suppression, anti-LGBT discrimination, and immigration bashing sheriff's departments. How much of that work has survived Jeff Sessions and Matthew Whitaker is unclear. Then on as a cabinet member over labor, he fought for higher wages and overtime pay, retirement security, and collective bargaining rights. Let's have a round of applause to welcome these distinguished panelists. Okay, everybody's got your mic. To start off and lay a foundation for our conversation, we're going to ask Matt Barreto of Latino Decisions to walk us through some data. Matt?
All right, thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks to Estuardo Rodriguez, my good friend from the Rabin Group, for organizing and bringing this panel together. I'm going to attempt to click through some slides here. Let's see if this works. All right. Looks like I'm off to a good start. So I'm joining here from Latino Decisions, which is a research and polling consulting firm. We did a lot of work in the 2018 cycles, was stated, including in Texas. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a national flavor of what happened. How did we get to this moment? And then I'm going to try to highlight what I think were some of the interesting data points in Texas to answer this question that we were posed with of, is Texas turning purple? Okay, so what were the 2018 headlines? I'll do this just in a snapshot. Some of this stuff going to go through really quick. I know I have my friend Estuardo watching me for the time signal, so I'm going to go quickly so that I don't get yanked off the stage. Voter anger was real. Everybody knows this. People were tired of the attacks on our community. The racialized attacks that we were facing were at an all-time high, and people were telling us that, and you're going to see some data points on that. There was record Latino participation in this election, not just here in Texas, but nationally. For a midterm election, we'd never seen this many ballots cast in a midterm election. But the important takeaway here is that the glass is only half full. There is so much more potential, even after this historic election, in terms of registering and mobilizing Latino voters, and I hope to show you that with a couple of data points here in the end. Just to summarize how the vote went, we found for the Latino electorate that it voted 73% Democratic, 23% Republican in the generic House ballot nationally. This was bolstered by very strong support among African Americans and Asian Americans. And so it was really these three minority groups, Latinos, Asian Americans, and African Americans, that drove the blue wave. Even though Democrats did make really important inroads with white non-Hispanics, Anglo still voted majority Republican. And so that entire takeover that happened, those 43 seats that flipped, were the result of strong minority performance. Here in Texas, the exit polls said that Cruz won 35% of the Latino vote and Beto won 64%. Our polling firm, Latino Decisions, found that it was about 74-25. And so we plotted every single precinct in I think 15 county area that has a majority of the Latino population in Texas. And what we found was that when you looked at them, Beto got about 79% of the Latino vote, and Cruz only got about 20%. And so it's important to push back on this. While there were some Latinos who did vote for Cruz, it wasn't anywhere near the 35% that was stated. The election for Beto was really a high, not just in terms of turnout, but in terms of Democratic vote share. It is true that the Hispanic electorate in Texas is a bit more conservative, but the election this year in Beto, when you look at the official precinct results, was a really, really strong performance. But this was a referendum on Trump. As Trump himself asked, said, imagine my name was on the ballot. For many Latino voters, they did imagine that his name was on the ballot, and that was not good news for the Republicans. 73% of Latinos said that Trump's words made them angry. 72% said that that made them feel disrespected in this election. Not just angry, but disrespected, the way that he talked about our community. And one of the things that we found was we've been asking this question about every president, going back to George W. Bush and our polling of Latinos. Has the president had a positive impact on the Latino community? Has the president had a negative impact on the Latino community? Or has the president had no impact on your community? And frankly, we have historically found a lot of people saying that president hasn't really had much impact on our community. Because of the data we were getting in qualitative interviews, in open-ended questions, and in focus groups, we had to add a new category. Because people were not saying Trump is not just having a negative impact. Trump is a racist. People were volunteering this information. And so we added it as a category. And you can see here, it was the #1 response option for Latinos in 2018. 48% of Latinos, likewise 48% of African Americans, for their #1 answer said, Trump is a racist who is intending to hurt our community. And so that sentiment was real in 2018. What happened was that it wasn't just the campaigns, and it wasn't just Beto and the other candidates who were mobilizing. 77% of Latinos said that they personally asked a friend or a family member to also get involved. So we were self-organizing at an all-time high, at a rate higher than white non-Hispanics. Only 66% said that they had asked someone to mobilize and vote. But you see among minority communities, Latinos, African Americans, and Asian Americans, very high percentage of people were saying that we were asking other people to mobilize. Likewise, when asked, did someone contact you? We saw a record high. 53%. Now, a lot more could be done. We wish 100% of people had been contacted. But 53% of Latinos, the highest we've ever seen, said that someone from a campaign had contacted them. And this is among the 70 most competitive House districts. This was almost entirely the result of the efforts at the DCCC that were led by Ben Ray Lujan and Dan Sena, where they had an extremely robust outreach program that targeted Latinos, African Americans, and Asian Americans. And these communities were reporting that they were being responded. All right, so what did turnout look like in 2018? These are the 3 counties in Texas that got most of the attention. There were huge turnout increases here. Dallas, Harris, and Travis County. And Travis County got almost all the attention. 94% increase in ballots cast from 14 to 18. Almost double. 94% increase. These are the most high-density Latino counties in the state of Texas, 92 to 97% Latino. They had larger increases in ballots cast, 100, 109, 124, and then El Paso, Beto's home county, had a 168% increase. Okay. What about the other side of the state? These are the counties that have the highest density white populations. Believe it or not, there are places at 87, 84, 91% white. Their turnout increases were 30, 49, 56. When you put the entire state of Texas together, the places that drove the increase in ballots cast were the Rio Grande Valley. When you look inside Dallas, Harris, Travis, Bexar County, the places that drove the highest increase in ballots cast were the high-density Latino neighborhoods. This is nationally. This is every precinct across 8 states, 20,000 precincts. And what you're going to see is that over here on this side, where there are 0 Latinos in the precincts, the average change in ballots cast was 37%. You can see this conglomeration right here. If you go to the other side of the equation, high-density Latino precincts, 96% increase in the ballots cast. So everybody voted at higher rates in 2018, but in the non-Latino parts of America, it was only a 37 compared to 96. We saw the same trend here in Texas. Click. Can I get a click assist over there? Thank you. So in the state of Texas, we see the same trend line. And one more. If you look over here on this side of the screen where there's very low density Latino precincts, only about a 43% increase in ballots cast. If you look over on the other side, a 98% increase. In fact, 59% of Latino precincts in Texas had over a 70% increase in ballots cast, but only 18% of white precincts. So the growth in Texas was driven by the Latino community. This is what we estimate happened from 14 to 18 here in the state of Texas. 1 million Latino votes cast, and it went up to 1.8. 800,000 more ballots cast in one cycle. Okay, that sounds pretty good. 1.7 million on the rolls did not vote this year. On the rolls, already on the voter rolls. Latinos, just Latinos. We had 1.8. We could have been 3.6. There are 2 million Latino adult citizens right now in the state of Texas not registered to vote. So add those together. What did we lose by? 250,000 votes? There are 3.7 million eligible non-Latinos. That's why I say the glass is half full. It's not even. And before 2020, there are 393,000 US-born 17 and 18-year-olds, your little brothers and sisters, who will turn 18 by 2020. Just in the state of Texas, 393,000. Just that amount eclipses the margin that Beto lost by. So if we can register some of these folks here, this was a huge increase from 1 to 1.8, but we have 5.6 million eligible Latino voters in the state of Texas. The Latino vote is young. Our potential is our youth. The single largest age bracket of Latinos is 0 to 5. Next largest is 5 to 9. This is going to be pushing up. This is that 393,000. The Republicans are going to hit this iceberg. It's going to look like this. John Cornyn's not going to be happy. Okay? When these folks get registered to vote, it's going to dramatically change the state of Texas. So there was 2 House seats that flipped this year. This is the last thing I'm going to show you. There was 2 House seats that flipped this year. However, there were 7 House seats in the state of Texas that the Republicans narrowly won. They had 53% or less in 7. In California, we flipped 7 House seats, and that got a lot of attention. Only 2 here, but there's 7 more. Texas 2, 10, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 31. And 23, of course, getting most of the attention. Across all of those House seats, the Democrats lost by a combined 73,000 votes, about 10,000 votes. That's not very many votes to move, 10,000. Okay? Across these districts, there are over 100,000 eligible Latinos in these. We've estimated how many were registered, how many didn't vote. If you look at the last column, there are just in these 7 districts, 656,000 non-voting eligible Latinos. We lost them by 73,000. There are 10 times almost, as many non-voting eligible Latinos in these 7 districts. We only need to move about 8,000, 13,000 votes in each of these. And in each of these districts, if you look at an example, in Texas 22, there's 52,000 eligible not registered, 27,000 registered non-voting. Just in Texas 22, there's 80,000, okay? We can plot this for the whole state. These are just the competitive districts that we just narrowly lost. And that's why I say there's so much potential here in Texas. So what did we learn? Continued investment has the greatest impact for short, medium, and long-term gains in the Latino community. We saw huge increases here. Latinos and people of color drove the blue wave. And the thing I want to lead you with is that good candidates, which you guys saw here in 2018, voter registration drives, and continued investment in Latinos will make Texas a coveted swing state in the very near future. Once that happens, I don't know if that's in 2020 or 2024. Once that happens, the electoral map is closed to the GOP. The Democrats can lose Florida, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio, North Carolina, and Arizona. We can lose all of those states and still get 277. We don't need to win Florida, Pennsylvania, none of these if we get Texas. If Texas is just competitive, they're going to have to spend $150, $250 million. Okay? So how do we get those people registered? Hopefully that's what we're going to be talking about, and hopefully that's what we're going to be working on, because if we start to get those people registered, 5.6 million are eligible. Texas is not, is it purple? It already is. The question is it already leaning blue? Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Let me just tell you folks standing, there's, I think, 8 chairs over here. There's 1 or 2 here. You can come ahead, because I'm going to talk for a little while, and you won't miss anything. And then we'll get the first question out, and you'll be ready to listen to these guys. That's a really interesting presentation, Matt. And I, however, have seen this rodeo a few times before, and am skeptical. I'm paid to be skeptical. Okay, I could tell you about in 2002 when I returned to Texas, John Judas and Rui Teixeira had written this book called The Emerging Democratic Majority. Bob Mong, who was editor of the Dallas Morning News at that time, said, oh, you got to read this book, and had to acclimate myself to what was about to happen. That year, the Texas Dems had the Dream Team, and they were running for the top statewide offices. Some of us remember that. The big issue then, as it is now, was when would the great sleeping giant, the Hispanic vote in Texas, awake and shake the political firmament of our state. More than a decade and a half later, it still hasn't, but 2018 was very interesting. I would just tack on to what Matt said. Not only did Beto scare the bejeebers out of Ted Cruz, not only did Colin Allred retire Pete Sessions, Lizzie Fletcher retire John Culbertson in Houston. We had a net gain of 12 seats in the Texas House and net gain of 1 in the Texas Senate. Really, most people don't know this, but Democrats seized control of 4 regional state courts of appeals. That hasn't happened in a generation or more. As well as swept county offices in Harris County, Houston. So the Dems are feeling their oats in Tejas, but we've seen them dream big, Glenn Maxey, and be crushed. Good to see you, sir. After 2006 and 2008 gains, those were wiped out and then some in 2010. With Wendy Davis in 2013 and 2014, hopes soared, wiped out again. Why shouldn't we expect state Dems to be deflated come November 2018, Tom? And I'm going to ask each of you to respond to this.
Well, what I believe you're saying implicitly, and I've said this many times, is demographics are not destiny. When I hear people say you don't need to worry, demographics are destiny, frankly, that's fingernails on chalkboard for me. Demographics are only destiny when we build authentic relationships, when we make the case for why the Democratic Party is the party that's fighting for you, the party that has your back. Joe Biden always said to me when I worked in the Obama administration, all politics is personal. And what we have to do, and what I'm most proud of in this last cycle, is we became a 50-state party again, and every zip code party again. We built those authentic relationships, and we didn't just do it in a sprint, we did it in a marathon. We were organizing early, and we were organizing everywhere. And we understood that success wasn't simply at the top of the ticket with, say, Beto, but it was up and down the ticket. You go to Harris County, and the person who administers elections in Harris County, they had early voting there. And you know when the early voting closed on a given day? 4:30. Well, are you a bank or are you an early voting center? And the problem is elections have consequences, and you had the wrong person in that job. That person no longer has that job. We now have people who want to make sure that every eligible person can vote, and we should make it easier for eligible people to vote. So we have to remember, number one, that demographics are not destiny. We have to remember, number two, we have to organize everywhere and make the case. And you know what? We have a strong case to make. And it's not simply talking about Donald Trump. We won't, well, let's just stipulate. He would be so terrified to be in this room. I mean, look around. Somos Mexico. I mean, oh my God, this is his worst nightmare. Mexico got me thinking, oh my God, his worst nightmare. But what we have to make sure we're doing is we're articulating what we're fighting for. We want to make sure that if you have diabetes, that we're going to fight to bring down the cost of your insulin. We're going to make sure you don't lose your health insurance. We're going to make sure that Texas isn't the 50th state in the country in terms of children's health coverage. You shouldn't be competing with states to see who's the worst in so many metrics. You shouldn't have the largest number of minimum wage workers in America. Those are bad metrics, and those are metrics that disproportionately affect Latinos. And so when we organize, when we lead with our values, when we field good candidates everywhere, and we think long term. We didn't get to the top of the mountain with Beto, but we made tremendous progress, and we keep fighting. That's how I think we're going to make sure that what happened before, there's no backsliding. And people are awakened now like I've never seen in my lifetime. And Matt's spectacular data demonstrates that. The last time we had turnout of this level in the aggregate was in the Civil Rights Movement. And you see what Latinos did. It really frosts me when I hear, and I got asked a lot, well, Latinos didn't show up. That is wrong. It is provably wrong. And we need to tell that story. But what Matt also says that's right is, we made progress, but we got a lot more to do.
Daniel Garza, will Democrats in Texas be dancing or dejected on election night next year?
So maybe. I mean, either one, right? That doesn't answer the question, but it's. I don't know where we'll be in the future because a lot will depend actually on the engagement and the outreach that is being done. Look, by the way, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and it's always a pleasure to be. I was with these two fine gentlemen in a previous panel in Los Angeles. It was an honor. Abraham Lincoln once said, I will join with someone when they're right, and I will distance myself from that someone when they're wrong. What that tells me is that when an individual, and even as a group, as Latinos, when we feel that there is a connection, when someone aligns with our policy priorities, when they are listening to us, we will respond. That will appeal to us, just like any other voter. And when it doesn't happen, well, we'll respond in kind. We will disconnect too. And right now, there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of frustration with Latinos, like there is with a lot of Americans with what they're seeing at the federal government, and even now, coursing through the halls of state governments, of the division, the polarization. That instead of having a governance approach of working together, of bridging, of coming together where they agree on things, we're seeing the parties divide. We're seeing them revert back to the base, to their loudest voices. And that causes a lack of action in government. And so we don't get a stop to runaway spending, and we don't get affordable care and quality care. And we don't get all these things really that will make societies prosper. And I guess what my point is that there's gonna be a point where Latinos will break one way or the other. We're not baked in yet. We're not an ethnicity that swings fully one way or the other. Look, you're talking about some of the numbers. And you may disagree with some of these numbers, but it's still a trend here. Yes, of course, Beto O'Rourke got super close to Ted Cruz. But in a state where there's 30 million Texans and 10 million of us are Latinos, he still won. Heard in a district, 23, that is 75% Latino, beats a Latina, Filipina, in his race. By the smallest of margins, within 1,000 votes. But he did the work. He connected. He was out there talking to them and didn't take Latinos for granted. And that is, I think, behooves both sides to take a look at that. Greg Abbott won governor with a significant size of the Latino electorate at 42%. What that tells me is we're listening to both sides. And you're absolutely right. The work needs to be done, and you cannot take us for granted, and we will not be taken for granted.
Matt Pareto, do you want to let your numbers speak, or do you have a few other thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the Abbott numbers were proven to be lower. He did do better than Trump, but it wasn't 42%. It was maybe in the mid-30s. But the Hurd example, I think, is a good one because Will Hurd did do a lot of outreach, and I don't know what the exact number of Latino votes he got, but it was certainly way higher than what Ted Cruz got. And he did do a lot of outreach. And you also saw he was one of the first ones to come out against the national emergency and say that this was not going to be good for his community. And so if you are doing that engagement, I think that is the single most important thing. If you're doing that engagement, that's how you connect with voters. And the numbers that I put up in terms of the potential are just that. They're just potential. And I think Tom and I agree on this. The demographics are not destiny. And that's why I mentioned you have to field good candidates and you have to do voter registration drives. It's not just voter mobilization drives in October. The voter registration drives have to be there. And that also was happening here in Texas with groups like Jolt and others that were doing that voter registration and voter organization. And if that happens, that voter registration and organization, and then the candidates come to the community and engage people and actually talk to them, that's where you're going to start to see this transition. And I think that's starting to happen. We saw that in 2018. We didn't necessarily see it in the Wendy Davis election. We didn't see that same level of engagement. And we did see that whether it was with Beto or whether it was with a lot of the House candidates, Colin Allred, or whether it was with Escobar and Garcia and others.
Let's talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, Donald Trump. If you look at the marquee races in Texas in the last 3 cycles, as we mentioned, Democrat Wendy Davis lost to the Republican Attorney General Greg Abbott in the governor's race in 2014 by 20 points. Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton in this state in 2016 by only 9 points. Mitt Romney had carried it by 16 points against Barack Obama in 2012. And then Beto O'Rourke coming within 2.6 percentage points of upsetting Ted Cruz. The big narrowing has happened on Trump's watch. What factors will determine whether Trump and John Cornyn can reverse that trend as they top the GOP ticket here next year? Tom, you want to take that?
Well, sure. I think there's multiple dimensions to that. You know, when Danielle mentioned Lincoln, I think what we have to understand is the party of Lincoln is dead. It's been replaced by the party of Trump. You know, the party of Lincoln was once the party of civil rights. The party of Trump is the antithesis of that. And so one of the reasons why we have opportunity here is if I were giving a Lifetime Achievement Award at a Democratic Party event in California, I would give my Lifetime Achievement Award to Pete Wilson,
Prop 187?
the former Republican governor and senator from California. He decided his roadmap to the presidency was to bash immigrants, Prop 187. He transformed a constituency that was lean Democratic into a constituency that is unequivocally Democratic. Orange County used to be Ronald Reagan country. Now orange is the new blue. And that in no small measure is because of Latinos. We have the same phenomenon, not only here in Texas, but across America with this president. Because, and where I respectfully take issue, and maybe Daniel didn't say this, but this notion that, people are, a little fed up in Washington because both sides aren't doing it. No, there's only one side after what happened in Charlottesville that couldn't call out bigotry when we saw it. There's only one person who has called Mexicans rapists. There's only one person who is responsible for putting infants and young people in cages and separating them from their parents. And so make no mistake, there's no false equivalencies here. We have a tremendous opportunity in a sense, and I hate that it's been opportunity created by unmitigated disaster and tragedy that has just destroyed so many lives. But that's why we need to be out there and organizing. And the challenge we have to understand is, even if we do that, a fundamental tenet of the Republican philosophy, and Texas is ground zero, is to make it harder, not easier, for eligible people to vote. Why do I know that? Because I'm the guy who sued Texas for your voter ID law. Let me give you some data. And this is record evidence. This isn't Tom Perez talking. This was what the state stipulated to in our voter ID case. Over a 10-year period, roughly 44 million votes cast. 0 reported incidents of non-citizen voting. 2 reported incidents of in-person voter fraud. 2. That was the problem that required the solution of the Texas voter ID law, which means, and you know that law, if you have your concealed carry permit, that's a permissible form of ID. Your UT ID, not a permissible form of ID. In addition, in their redistricting, and the guy who sued them in their redistricting case was moi. We saw what they did. They took Latino districts that had been organized, and they were mobilizing, and they were coming out and voting, and they split them up. And they did that with the intent of diluting the vote. Don't take my word for it. Look at what the 3-judge panel said. So we have to understand that we can do this, but we've got to organize like heck. And we're probably going to have to continue suing like heck, because they are going to continue to work. They can't win in the marketplace of ideas. So what they're going to continue to do is make it harder, not easier, for eligible people to vote. That's shameful. That's un-American. And we just have to understand that is what they will continue to do. So we've got a twofold thing here. We got to play offense. We got to get our folks out. We got to lead with our values and talk about what we're fighting for. But we've also got to understand that isn't enough. We've got to understand this. Voters, this is a ground zero in the United States in the world of voter disenfranchisement. And that's shameful.
Daniel, before we came on, you said you're not coming up here to defend Trump, but can you give us a little empathy and maybe try to get in the head of John Cornyn as he's running on the same ticket with Trump next year?
Well, let me say as a preface about Trump, whatever you may feel about Donald Trump, our president, he was elected president because a lot of people felt that they weren't being listened to. And they felt that Washington was ignoring them. And this is across the country. And so they went with a non-conventional candidate. And that should send alarm bells to both sides, both Republicans and Democrats, because he was a non-conventional candidate within the Republican Party too. Look, people are worried about the crushing debt that our children face. They're worried about an inadequate public school system, if not failing in some quarters. They're worried about the over-criminalization of our communities. We spend $80 billion on 2 million folks that we have incarcerated. Vast resources on wasted vast capacities of our people that we should be doing a better job on. And when you start seeing the numbers, the results of record unemployment for Latinos, record labor participation rates in the positive trend, wage increases, home ownership increases. That's a record that is a challenging one to try to overcome. So don't take that for granted, his past rhetoric is what I would say. And as far as Cornyn, remember Cornyn won the majority of the Latino vote. Again, a number that you may dispute. But according to exit polls, he won the Latino vote in his last election for Senate. Now, again, that proves my point that the Latino vote is not baked in. Why? Because he won in one Senate cycle, the Latino vote, a Republican, and yet O'Rourke flips that script really quick. We saw that in Colorado, too, where Michael Bennet, the candidate for Senate, a Democrat, won the Latino vote by 90%. Good Lord, 90%, that is strong. And you're thinking, well, that's it, it's gone, the Latino vote in Colorado. Cory Gardner, the candidate for Senate, won it 45% of the Latino vote. Flipped that script completely around. Again, you have to connect on the issues, on the policies. Are you connecting with, are you going to where we're at? Our churches, where we practice our faith. Are you going to the Chamber of Commerce's, Latino, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce's? Are you in our universities talking to our kids? Are you sensitive? Are you listening to us? Are you connecting with us? On culture, on economics, on all these things that are happening that is like creating so much angst to people. And when you connect, we're gonna respond.
Matt, on the subject of Trump, for you, I had just a customized question because you do so many focus groups and are in touch with so many Latino voters. Is there polling evidence or that rather than motivate the newer Latino citizens to vote, first, second generation immigrant families, that maybe instead Trump somehow will paralyze them and they'll stay at home? Any data on that or just anecdotal evidence?
I think that's a serious concern. There is a lot of literature that's been published in psychology and political science, but also in focus group and research findings that fear is a paralyzing emotion. And anger is a mobilizing emotion. And so when people are afraid, they do feel paralyzed. They do withdraw. And so I wouldn't say it's just necessarily the rhetoric surrounding the elections. That tends to generate anger. As we saw, 73% of Latinos said what Trump said made them feel angry. But if you think about the larger issues that are at play, what's happening with the deployment of ICE and CBP, you think about what's happening with leaning in on sheriffs and police in minority communities, that does start to generate fear. And so I think that needs to be coupled. That fear can be transitioned into anger, which we know is a mobilizing emotion, if organizing is happening and if there are good candidates who are calling it out. And so if you remember back to the Texas Senate election this cycle, there was a time at which Beto used an example of police shootings and violence to talk about how he rejected that, and he stood with the organizers. And Cruz made a video out of it, sort of making fun of him for it, and that ended up getting more attention for Beto because it inspired people in the black and brown communities to see a politician actually standing up for him. It took whatever fear might have been there, and it transitioned it to anger, and it transitioned it to action. And so I think that's the script, is that fear is creating threat. It's really creating anger. And so the most likely scenario is that if we are organized, we'll be able to take that rhetoric, we'll be able to take all of those statements he made, all the statements he'll continue to make. We haven't heard the worst yet. The 2020 cycle is going to bring much worse. Whatever you've heard now, whatever you heard in the CPAC speech, whatever you heard in the National Emergency Declaration, there's going to be much, much worse on the 20 campaign cycle. And if we can take that and convert it into anger with candidates who stand up and reject it. So the other thing that we've learned in focus groups is that it doesn't necessarily create alienation. People are still pissed off at Trump, but they're not 100% sure who to redirect their vote to unless a Democratic candidate comes up and flatly rejects that. And that's why you're starting to see the field of 2020 hopefuls. They're all very strongly rejecting racism and hate speech and stuff like that. That wasn't always the case. It used to just sort of like 20 years ago, it would just sort of like fall under the rug. Now the Democratic candidates are coming out very strongly rejecting that because that sends a signal to black and brown communities that I hear what you're going through, I don't agree with it, and not only that, I reject it. And so then that can lead and transition into mobilization. So I think that's the playbook. I think that's the way that it should go. And so that's what you should be paying attention to. The candidates that don't quite lean into that as heavily will be the ones that pay the penalty.
And you're alluding, of course, to Beto's defense of taking a knee and all those things about police brutality.
Right.
That was a fascinating moment in the Senate campaign last year to see. Initially, it seemed to help Cruz in the polls, but then over time, maybe worked out so that, like you're saying, Beto got some benefit from that. Question for Mr. Chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Nancy Pelosi was here in Austin recently, and she called Texas ground zero, predicted Democrats next year will flip the Texas House, expand the U.S. House majority they've got, and retire John Cornyn. A few weeks earlier, the DCCC called Texas, quote, a focal point of the House Democrats' offensive strategy. They targeted 6 more sitting Republican congressmen from Texas. Matt's list of 7, he added Dan Crenshaw in CD2 to that list.
I think Texas, too, is going to be on the D-Trip list very soon.
You heard the inside scoop here. Quinnipiac's latest poll shows President Trump leading in the state only by 1 or 2 percentage points over Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Beto O'Rourke. Gallup last month found Trump's approval rating in Texas at 41% was lower than in traditional battleground states such as Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, all at 42%. Arizona, Florida, 43%. Tom, you and the DNC could bring next year's Democratic National Convention to Houston. Is it time for the national? No, please, no. Is it time for the National Party to finally invest in this state?
Absolutely is the short answer, and the slightly longer answer is if you ask me what I'm most proud of in the first 2 years on the job, and it's been 2 years and change now for me, it's that we've become a 50-state party again. If there's one lesson I learned in this cycle, starting in 2017 in places like Alabama, is that we can win everywhere. We were winning special elections in 2017 in places like Oklahoma, state legislative seats that were in the Bible Belt, where Democrats were listening. As you know, Daniel and Matt correctly say, they were out there knocking doors and talking about the issues that people cared about. And here in Texas, when I'm number one, you have a spectacular state party chair, Gilberto Hinojosa. And what he has done is what we're trying to do nationally, which is making sure that our mission is to elect Democrats up and down the ticket. I mean, I look at Fort Bend. You know, wasn't that Tom DeLay territory? No, that's Democratic territory is what that is. You look at Harris County, and every single, I think the judge, I think she's 27 years old. 28 now, sorry. Missed her birthday. Tell her I said happy belated birthday. That's remarkable because, you know, today's judge is tomorrow's member of Congress, is the next day's senator, and who knows what. And that's why places like Texas are remarkable. And that's why when I heard people were understandably saddened and disappointed when Beto didn't make it to the mountaintop. And what we have to do a better job of is to make sure we're continually thinking long term. Because you look at all the success here in Texas, and you mentioned the State House of Representatives. That is huge because we got redistricting coming up. I think we need to flip, is it 8 seats or something like that in the State House? I might have that off by 1 or 2.
I think
Is it 9? Okay.
Is what you need.
Okay, I was close.
You're very good.
And and that changes the complete trajectory of redistricting. In North Carolina, the Republicans had a supermajority in both houses going into the 2018 cycle. We broke the supermajority, and now we're poised to take the North Carolina House of Representatives in 2020, and Roy Cooper is going to win re-election, and we go from there. I think John Cornyn is exceedingly vulnerable, and Matt provided a roadmap for success. But that success is in everybody in this room's hands, because our democracy is on fire, and we need everyone to be a full participant. I can tell you the DNC is a full participant. One of the things we did last year, we purchased over 100 million cell phone numbers. We gave about 9.2 million cell phone numbers to the state party here in Texas. The most important organizing tool, in my opinion, in 2018 was this, the smartphone. We built relationships via texting. There's certain parts of Texas you can't door knock, or it's not efficient. And so you got to do digital engagement. So when you buy those cell phone numbers and give them to state parties, when you're investing, and we invested millions of dollars in Latino outreach in states where we had opportunity, and we're going to keep doing it, and we're going to do it in 2019, not just in the 4-month sprint. This is a marathon. It's a marathon relay, and we've all got to run it together. And I firmly believe that it's when we do that stuff, and I'm somewhat redundant here, that's how we turn the advantages that we have into actual victories.
I'll let the record note he did not get me a dollar figure I can report to Manny Garcia over at state headquarters, but that's okay. I'm going to skip over you, Daniel, for a second question to Matt, because with help from my friend James Aldretti a few years ago, he used Latino decision data on your, Daniel's citing a lot of exit polls, but this subtle thing, Matt really stresses these surveys of Latino voters before the election to see if they've even been contacted, if voter outreach, GOTV, has even reached them. And James, a few years ago, had this wonderful slide based on Matt's numbers, which showed all of the states, New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, wherever, that were kind of purpling up after multi-cycle investment in GOTV with Hispanics. And the cost in Texas, because of our scale, was prohibitive. And that was at least one answer for why our Latino vote wasn't being mobilized. Now, the question for Matt is, you know what happened in 2018, especially in Harris County, where we had Texas Organizing Committee, Project Top, Workers Defense Fund, Beto O'Rourke with a lot of money, and you alluded to the new county judge there, very important post, Lena Hidalgo. Is that underinvestment we've seen, Matt, in the border areas of Texas going to be reversed? And if so, how much money is that going to take between now and November of 2020?
Well, first of all, thank you, James, for the plug, as always. I probably owe him a drink afterwards for that. I think the number was 25%, probably, from the 2012 election.
Of how many had been contacted?
25% of Latino voters in Texas said that someone contacted them in 2012. 1 out of 4. And it was the lowest. In Colorado that year, which was a very high priority state for Obama, it was over 60. Over 60% of voters said that someone from a campaign had contacted them. Here it was 25%. This year, in 2018, in the midterm, that number was 50%. So from 12, that's 6 years, but with Beto and a competitive election, it doubled. So we're already seeing that investment increase. And then you have what I pointed out earlier of the self-mobilization. People are frustrated and they're not waiting for the campaign to contact them. There's somebody political in everyone's family and they're reaching out and telling other people. So you're starting to see that happen now, number one. And I think that's what explains the sweeps in places like Harris County and Dallas County, and also in Tarrant County. And in some of the suburbs around Dallas and Houston, you start to see that Democratic reach. Now, when you think about the Valley, there still needs to be a lot more work done there. It's not as many votes as there are in the cities here. So there are still more votes in San Antonio, Dallas, Austin, Houston. But the density is such that if we ignore the Rio Grande Valley, then we're going to be ignoring a huge percentage. About 25% of the Latino electorate is down there. And so across the board, they need to take what happened in 2018 and double it. As I said, we went from 1 million votes to 1.8 million votes. That's a huge increase, from 1 million to 1.8 million. There are 5.6 million eligible Latinos. So that's 3 point some million that are on the sidelines still. So if we can slowly start to make those inroads in there, what's going to happen is once people become voters, they need less contact. They need less reminders. We all know people who are going to vote no matter what happens. We call these the 4 out of 4s, meaning when I look at your vote history, the last 4 elections you voted in, you're already sort of organized to vote. The more people we can start to push into there, then we can redirect our resources to the new voters, the 18-year-olds and the 20-year-olds and the newly naturalized citizens. And so if that happens, we're right at this precipice where if the same level of engagement happens in 20 that happened in 18, with higher youth and minority turnout already, Texas is going to become, as that polling continues, Texas is going to become a battleground state. Okay, Arizona is going to be the #1 most competitive battleground state in 20. Probably 50-50 for presidential. Probably we'll see the most ads, the most outreach, the most resources. If the Texas polling continues in this direction and people are seeing the voter rolls start changing, all we have to do is look at the voter rolls. Are the voter rolls getting more Spanish surname voters on them? The TLC, the Texas Legislative Council, presents this to us on an annual basis by the state of, or a monthly basis. Do you see that? Then Texas is going to be a battleground state because it's such a prize for the Democrats, not just for the Senate race, but for the presidential because of what I said earlier. It closes off any opportunity for the Republicans. So I think you're going to see that. There's so much money here in Texas that normally pours out into other states. There's Democratic money here in Texas. And as we start working, if Tom's team is working, if Sherry Bustos' team is working, if Catherine Cortez Masso's team is working in Texas, it's going to be a battleground. It's not going to be purple. It's going to be a battleground. It's going to be up there with Arizona.
Okay, Daniel, I have a customized question for you, but I saw you wrinkle your brow, so you may want to hold on to the, pretend you're in a presidential debate and you can answer the last question if you want. But much as we in Texas like to think of ourselves as different, we're becoming more like the rest of the country, more of an urban, suburban state. Now, last November, we saw the rural vote arguably save Ted Cruz, but that is shrinking steadily. As the population growth here is stunning in our metropolises and the exurbs. So how do Republicans in Texas talk in a way that continues to appeal to non-college educated white males, as Trump has been so successful in doing, when the fastest growing areas are all these bedroom communities, suburban areas where that message has problems?
Okay, so let me preface that answer by saying we are nonpartisan, so I'm not here speaking on behalf of the Republican Party. But as a political observer, look, you have to connect with Latinos. I mean, I talked about the angst that we're feeling and sometimes the disconnect. In a state like Texas and California, the presidential, we're a red state and California is a blue state in a political sense. And so they've sort of written us off. And so the parties will not spend money. Now, let me say entre parentheses that even though we have our differences on ideology, I'm really proud of Tom Perez. Can we give him an applause? I mean, to have that kind of representation is amazing at that high level. I never saw that growing up. The people that did speak, Latinos who were speaking on television, I didn't really... A lot of them who were izquierdistas, activists, it didn't resonate with me. I'm a limited government guy. I grew up on William F. Buckley watching him on the firing line, that I agreed with him on economics, on faith, on principles of all these other things. I'm sort of conservative libertarian, right? And so to now see that we're governors and we're senators and congressmen and leading the party is an amazing thing. And it's exciting to see the future and where we're positioned as a Latino electorate, especially like in the state of Texas. Yeah, maybe in the past they ignored us, but they can't ignore us anymore. And you talked about, the eligible voters, only half of us are registered in Texas. If you can tick up that number, we can flex even more muscle. And we're starting to flex that muscle. We are now in the halls of government at every level, operating at every level. So we have no excuse, this generation, to mobilize, to activate, to inform our community on those issues that are important to us. Whether you're conservative, libertarian, liberal, that we engage our community and that they make an informed decision. And I think that's what scares both sides, that they now have to earn our vote. And they have to work hard for it. And they have to spend the money to earn that vote like they spend it on every other American. And that's exciting to see, because that could swing either way. It could benefit Democrats and it could benefit Republicans. And so, at the Libre Initiative, our goal is to make sure that Latinos are informed on the state of economics, on the state of individual freedoms, on government spending, on the size and the control of government, and how we're centralizing way too much power in Washington, D.C. These resonate with Latinos. So to answer the question, talk to us. Tell us what your vision is, what your plan is. Listen to us and what our priorities are, too, on a failed education system and how we can best educate our children and set the table with educational liberty, economic freedom, these kind of things that are going to allow us to position ourselves in the marketplace so we can move on and up. We're facing barriers that, maybe disproportionate that other Americans are not. In some states, Tom, I don't know if you've seen this, half of us don't have a driver's license. That's killing us. That's a major barrier. 33% of us nationwide do not have a high school diploma, adults. 30% of us only speak Spanish. These are major barriers to opportunity in the marketplace. So if we can work on these kind of issues and remove these barriers and the overcriminalization and the debt, then the free market becomes real to Latinos and they'll fight for it. Now, I'm kind of spooked on this whole socialism discussion, this talk, that conversation that's starting to filter. I think it's becoming way too mainstream. And we're fighting against that, right? And there's millions of Latinos who believe that too. And if they engage those Latinos, you're going to have them mobilize all over America.
This is a question I think I'll throw to both Tom and Matt, that you may have seen the Washington Post political data analyst, Matt David Byler, this week wrote about it, but you really can't sneeze at Trump's political support among Hispanics. Byler wrote that Trump may overstate it, but it's probably 25-30% of the Hispanic electorate that is supporting Trump and Republicans. And if you leave aside differences in countries of origin, Hispanics who are rural, that tend to be more open to Republicans. Hispanics who are evangelical Protestants, same thing. And Hispanic males, more open to the Republican message than females. So self-identified Hispanics who are in the third generation of their families or longer duration are more likely to call themselves American than Hispanic or Latino. They're less likely to say they've been discriminated against because of their background and feel less connected to their country of origin. Will there remain a sizable chunk of Latinos susceptible to the GOP message? Tom?
Well, let's assume that those numbers are accurate, and Matt can give us,
which they are not.
Which they are not. And I'm going to give Matt the floor to take that question on, because the exit polling and then you look at precinct data, there's a huge difference between exit polling and precinct data. But let's say it's 8 out of 10. So 20% are thinking about Donald Trump. For me, what we have to do is to make sure that the 80%, and I'll get to the 20% in a second, but what Matt has outlined in his slides is that we're leaving votes on the table, because it's not just 80%, it's 80% of a really big denominator. If you get an 80% of a smaller denominator because people who are with you either aren't registered or are registered and staying home, then you have lost. In Texas, as we saw in Beto in 2018. And so that to me is, again, underscores what we have to do. We have to also understand that there are a lot of Latinos who are evangelicos, and so there is an appeal. If you look at Puerto Ricans who came from the island post-Maria down into Florida, many of them registered independent. Part of it is because Puerto Rican politics is very unique, and I will just stop there. You got Republican statehooders, Democratic statehooders, and everything else. And but there are also a fairly sizable number, and I've spent a lot of time on the island, of evangelicos who come to the States. And so we do need to understand that we have to, all politics is personal, that we have to articulate what we stand for. And, frankly, when you got 8 out of 10, I'm not going to stop there because I want 10 out of 10. And we got that in California. I mean, in California, the Latino community is a rock-ribbed Democratic community. I think we have an opportunity to do this here, but again, only if we are building those relationships and leading with our values and fielding candidates who articulate those values.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so just in terms of the data, I mean, just so folks know, I mean, most of the polling data that you see from what we call quote-unquote mainstream, or what I say so-called mainstream polling organizations, first of all, still today, in 2018, only interview in English. So if you prefer to be interviewed in Spanish, you're not included in the poll at all. They don't have representative samples of Hispanics according to socioeconomic status. So in one of the polls that just came out that we reviewed, 60% of the Hispanic respondents in the poll had a college degree. And as Dan just said, the actual number is like 27%. So they had over double English-speaking acculturated folks. So it's just borders on like laughable, all the way to negligence, to maybe even like racism, the way that they like treat our data in polling. So I don't believe that. Now, I think the number is closer to 20. So, 25 to 30% is not incredibly far off. The poll that came out in Politico that said Trump had a close to 50% approval rating was bad. But I think Tom's right that their actual number is probably around 20%. In all the polling we do, we can't move about 20% off of Republican ideals, including support for the wall and everything else. So let's say that 20% is in fact there. Going back to something that Dan said, I think that's important, is that we have seen these swings. And so while right now the Democratic Party is doing really well generally, I don't have any concern over Trump making inroads into the Latino community between now and 20. Zero. I can't imagine a scenario in which he'll get a single more Latino vote than he did in 16. The concerns are whether or not the Democratic Party will maximize the turnout, not the percentage share. The percentage share will be 78 or 82. Mm-hmm. That doesn't matter. It matters about adding those 800,000 votes like Beto did here in Texas. And so we have what we have in Texas. We have the same thing in Arizona. There's about 1.5 million eligible non-participating Latinos. And we have the same thing in Florida. We have the same thing in Utah. There's a large portion there. And we have the same thing in Kansas, which is about a 10% Latino state. And Tom and I were talking earlier about North Carolina, which has a huge Latino population, and now a bunch of U.S. borns are turning 18. So the question is about maximizing turnout. It is the case, though, among those 80%, that they are not, outside of maybe California, they are not dyed-in-the-wool Democrats. 5 generations will only vote Democrat. They are voting Democrat more increasingly as a result of response to policy and candidates, most notably Obama. But we don't know what's going to come next. I'll give you a couple examples that you should be using that I won't criticize. First of all, you know W did well. Everyone knows W did well in Texas and nationally. Not 55%, but close. In his re-elect, he got 48, which is really good. In his re-elect in 98, he got 48. Brian Sandoval, in his re-elect, got 45, according to our data, 45. So those are two good ones I'll never argue with. And so there are instances where when candidates do that outreach, they can get into the 40s, right? Then you have in the same state of Nevada, Harry Reid getting 90% in the 2010 cycle against Sharon Engel. What that shows is that there is some flexibility there. Which candidate is connecting and doing that outreach? Trump is certainly not doing that. He's not attempting to do that, right? So we're not necessarily worried about that. We're worried about the denominator, as Tom said. If that denominator can go up, we'll take an 80-20 split and have the turnout increase by 50%, and we'll run the table of every Hispanic state. So that's what the focus should be on, not whether or not Trump is actually. Every time those articles come out, I say, let them fool themselves with this. Fine with me. That's a waste of time. We'll focus on trying to get the denominator larger.
And I would say that when you mentioned George W. Bush against Gary Morrow in 1998, that was not only a high percentage for Bush, but a low turnout election.
There's a low turnout.
Probably for Sandoval, I don't know, in Nevada.
When you have a low turnout, 14 was a very low turnout election in Nevada. When you have low turnout elections, that's when Republicans tend to do better because Latino Republicans are turning out at higher rates. And what it means is it doesn't mean that Sandoval got 45% of all Hispanics in Nevada. He got it of the ones who voted. And a lot of Democrats were just not excited in 14 about that cycle. And the same thing in 98 here in Texas in the Bush re-elect. He wasn't unpopular. And so a lot that were Democratic leaning didn't vote. And so that's what he was in the high 40s.
Now let me just give you all a little exclusive on what is going to happen next year below Trump in Texas with the Republicans. 10 blocks, 6 blocks up Congress Avenue, what they are about this legislative session is to pass a major overhaul of public school funding, finance formulas, put some brakes on property tax increases, respond to the Santa Fe High School gun massacre in an NRA-approved way, and do a few things on mental health and some other things and get out. And they're going to go empty their war chests to beat their chest about what a great session they had. This has nothing to do with Trump messaging. This is Texas messaging. And it is likely to happen if they can get their act together. And they're going to go to the voters next year because, as Tom pointed out, next year's election in Texas is everything for the next decade. Mm-hmm. Texas House is the only way the Democrats can stop another partisan gerrymander in 2021. So just assume that's happened. Greg Abbott has got tons of money. They're all, Dan Patrick, they're spending money to help their team, touting what a great thing they did, not for charter schools or vouchers, Daniel, but for public schools in every Hispanic neighborhood, and tuned in to people's concerns about their property taxes. What's the effect of that? Run that through. You want to start, Daniel?
Yeah. So probably another number that you're going to dispute. The NBC Marist poll and the Pew Hispanic separately said that more Latinos self-identify as conservative than they do as liberal or moderate.
That's true.
Well, hey, you kind of disarmed me. I don't know what to say now.
But they're not voting Republican.
Well, no, and that's fine. Not all the time. So what happens here when a party, a candidate, and not necessarily Republican or Democrat, is connecting with Latinos, is listening to Latinos, is sensitive to their policy priorities and voting accordingly. And I'll say again, entre parentheses, this whole DACA situation and the inability of both sides to solve this issue is frustrating. It's maddening. And it's such an opportunity for either side. I think President Obama blew it, and now this administration is blowing it. Because, again, we're seeing this frustration of Latinos on both sides that they cannot come together on an issue that we all agree on. It's like 90% agree that we should have a permanent solution for dreamers. That this should be an issue like criminal justice reform where both sides come together and unify on and just get this done for the love of God, and then we can move on to the next phase. But they're not doing it. So all this rhetoric, all this talk, is great. It's all platitudes sometimes when you're listening to candidates. But when the real work is not getting done, we're not dumb. We're not stupid. We see that. We get frustrated like everybody else does. And a lot of it has to do with, are you delivering for the American people? Are you delivering for Texans on good policy? And a lot of the times they can point to the Democrat or the Republican and says, no, you're not. You're playing partisan games. You care more about the party and scoring political points than you actually care about the people that you're representing. This is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And sometimes it just looks like it's by the party, for the party, and of the party. And they got to stop that. And if they stop that, they're going to score massive points with us. I know they score with me.
Well, I don't think Greg Abbott and the Republicans are going to do anything about DACA, but for them, not repealing in-state tuition is the same thing as moderating on DACA. And I don't think you'll see them repeal in-state tuition for unauthorized immigrants. So we're not seeing Dan Patrick push the bathroom bill. So they're focused on meat and potatoes. Mr. Chairman and Matt, you'll get your chance. What do you think will be the effect of that in Texas if you actually have state Republicans going to the voters and saying, we did some stuff you wanted us to do?
Well, I just have to say one thing here, and I'll answer your question. In 2014, there was a bipartisan bill that passed the United States Senate, comprehensive immigration reform. President Obama fought like heck for it. Bipartisan in the Senate. It didn't pass because of John Boehner and Republican intransigence. They sat down with Donald Trump. Early on, he said, I'm open to a dreamer solution. They put one on the table. He swept it under the rug. He's an untrustworthy partner. So I just need to correct that with no disrespect. Those are the facts. I think I get back to the issue as it relates to your question of the denominator. What we have to do in 2020 here is make sure we continue to expand the denominator in these districts. And we have to make sure we have built relationships, because you can do one session here where you've just watched Democrats win in many, many races across this state. And then, hey, here's the plan. Let's pretend we care about these issues for one session, and hopefully they'll buy it. So our mission is to make sure they understand the totality of what we've been fighting for and what they've been fighting against. And when we accomplish that, and when we have increased the denominator, and when we, frankly, have reminded folks that, these are, and again, especially those Latinos there, that these are the folks who are with Trump, and they want you to vote for them. And I think Trump is going to be on the ballot in some of these down ballot races, as much as they're going to see an imperative to run against it. So denominators, values, reminding people of the history, because I really think the facts are on our side on these things.
Let me just be more explicit about what denominator you're talking about. In the last presidential election, nearly 9 million Texans voted. We have over 28 million citizens, residents of Texas. And in these midterm elections we've been talking about, in 2014, it was only 4.6 million. And that with Beto's effort last year, it went to 8.4 million, an 83% increase. So you're talking about a denomination to turn Texas into the Democratic column next year in the presidential race. Probably, 10, 11 million need to vote, Matt?
Yeah. I mean, you need to see probably another 2 million. 2 million votes cast. But I mean, you went from almost presidential levels here in a midterm. You went from 4.6 to 8.3. So you added 3.7 million votes in one cycle. And so Texas is growing, number one. So there's going to be more than 9 million votes cast. It wouldn't surprise me if there's 11 million votes cast. If there's 11 million votes cast in Texas in 2020, That means that we're going to be waiting to see what the election results are. They're not going to call it when the polls close. We're going to be waiting to see because we won't know, just like we were in election night of 2018. So I think that if that happens, if that expansion happens, those people who are coming into the electorate are much more likely to be leaning Democratic. Young people, people of color, newly naturalized citizens. These are the people who are coming into the electorate. And so some are just going to naturally come in. But if the party is helping bring more people in, and what Tom has been talking about, then you're going to see that accelerate. And if that happens, it's going to be very, very competitive. There's no reason that you can't expand the electorate dramatically. Part of the reason it hasn't expanded until this year is that people didn't think their vote was going to change the outcome. If the outcome was predetermined, if a Republican was going to win, if Romney was going to win, if Trump was going to win, if Abbott was going to win, people are voting for some offices, but they don't have that drive. This year, people thought Beto might win, and so they turned out en masse. They thought that Sylvia Garcia might win and Veronica Escobar and these others might win. And so when you have that hope, you're going to see lots and lots more voters come out. So I think you're going to see that happen. In terms of the strategy, it's a presidential year. That would have been a good strategy this year. All of that messaging about some bill that passed in Austin, ain't nobody going to know about that. They're going to know about Donald Trump and John Cornyn. That's what Texas is going to be about in 2020. No one is going to know about anything else. They won't know a single thing that the state legislature. They can yell about it all they want, but there are going to be commercials about Trump and Cornyn dominating the TV airwaves here in 2020, and so that's going to become a national. It's going to become a national election in a presidential year.
Okay, I've just been told we have 5 minutes. Daniel, you had a quick thought on that?
Yeah, really quick. One of the reasons that is given for the low turnout is because we're very young. We're 26 years median age, while the rest of the country is 10 years older than we are on average, like 36, 37 years of age. So a lot of us are just getting our jobs or careers, and it's like we got different priorities or whatever. But we're coming of age, and I think that's why those numbers are spiking up. And we're starting to feel a sense of ownership for our communities, our states, and our country. In Puerto Rico, the voter turnout is like really high. I think it's like 80, 85%, I would say. And the rest of the country for us, I think we're at 46, 45% overall. We're like really low. But once we start feeling like it matters, our vote matters, we're gonna come out. We're gonna have might like you've never seen before. And that's where I think it's gonna be important that both sides make the investments, make the connections that are necessary to appeal to us, to earn our vote. It's gonna be, again, because we're coming of age, and that's gonna be really exciting to see.
A quick question, just since we were talking about dreamers. There were just a handful of Republican congressmen who were supported DACA and Dreamers, and in 2018, they all evaporated. Carlos Curbelo in Florida, Michael Kaufman in Colorado, and Pete Vallejo in California. But there's one still standing, Will Hurd, here in Texas. And I just wondered, is that a result of his unique, cross-country ride with Beto, or his unique characteristics as a candidate, or does that tell us something about Texas, that he survived?
Yeah, really quick. I think that tells us something about Will Hurd, and also about Latino voters. We've arrived. We're matured. We can make a distinction between the ethnicity of a candidate or the rhetoric of a candidate and what the real results have been. What the actions have been of that candidate, and also their approach to governing. Is it one that seeks to work with the other side in a bipartisan way to get to the solution? And that's important to me. I know that. There are millions that feel like I do. We talked about more conservative or more Latinos identify as conservative. That translates to millions and millions of Latinos, and if you can tap into that vein, goodness gracious. And remember, there's another 30% that are moderate. So there's massive pool of Latinos that if you connect with them, especially like here in District 23, where Hurd did his job, 75% Latino district, and he wins.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. I'm going to give the chairman the last word, but I want to say about District 23, we had some interesting conversations in the Austin Bureau of the Dallas Morning News last fall. Gina Ortiz-Jones, as you noted, Filipina. I think one of you called her Hispanic. Of course, we could call her Asian American, but we'll quibble over that. She's going to be running again. There may be other Democrats running, so I don't want to put you in a bad spot, but what do you say about the Democratic Party resolve to win that seat and these other 6 that Matt identified?
Oh, I think Texas is going to be a ground zero to expand the majority in the United States House of Representatives and to take back the Senate. That's why there's so, and then to take back the State House. I mean, Glenn knows as much as anyone. That's a big deal. And you know, the point you made correctly in your question about these folks who, maybe Republicans who voted for like DACA, and we could think about a few other issues, and then lost. The reason why our politics have gotten so bad, in my judgment, the 2 most destructive forces in our democracy have been dark money and gerrymandering, partisan and racial. When you're thinking about a vote like that, if you're a Republican, the only thing you're thinking about in most districts is, if I vote for that, I'm going to get a challenge to my right. And the same is true, on the left. So I don't want to. That's not a partisan observation. That is not good for our democracy, and that is why, as we sit here today, one of the most important pieces of legislation that the Democrats are fighting for is going to pass today, H.R. 1. The reason it's the first bill in this Congress with Speaker Pelosi is because we can talk about health care, we can talk about all of these issues that are critical, but until we fix our democracy, we're going to have a lot of trouble making progress. And that is why I applaud Speaker Pelosi for making this H.R. 1 a top priority for Democrats. We need to continue to talk about this. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. And I applaud my friend from Maryland, John Sarbanes, one of the lead sponsors of this bill. I hope you'll pay attention to this bill, because the issues that we care about, I think we could move far forward. The reason immigration reform failed in 2014 was because Republicans who were willing to vote for it, after a guy named Eric Cantor lost unexpectedly in Virginia in a low turnout primary, Republicans got spooked. They said, I can't do this. If I vote for this, I'm going to meet his fate. And that's because of gerrymandering. So until we address these issues and restore our democracy, we're going to continue to be frustrated.
And I believe his old boss, Eric Holder's out trying to change all that gerrymandering. We give the chairman the last word. I just wanted to take a point of personal privilege to say that it's been wonderful to have Carlos Gonzalez Gutierrez in Austin representing the Mexican government. Good luck in San Diego. You are a great diplomat and a great friend. Thank you. Thank you all.
And thank you to the Rabin Group.
Yes.
Yes.
Estuardo.
Thank you for your Estuardo. And thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to the panelists.